What is up, everybody? Welcome to Limited Level Up. So we are back after a little bit of a break. Hope you didn't miss me too much. And first episode back, we got a pretty big one. It's going to be a Pioneer Masters Draft Primer. Yeah, might be asking, what is Pioneer Masters? I would not blame you if this set kind of flew under the radar for you. So Pioneer Masters is an arena exclusive set that will be able to be drafted in tandem with Foundations. It's not replacing Foundations, but it's sort of acting like the new Premier draft set. Like, it's going to be out for 6 weeks. I imagine most content creators are going to be putting out quite a bit of content on it, myself included. And I'm sure that even if you haven't heard of this set, you can probably piece together what this is. It's a Masters level set, so, pretty high power level generally, and consists of cards that are legal in the Pioneer format. Specifically, this was a set that was designed so they could bring a bunch of Pioneer legal cards that weren't on Arena to Arena. So a lot of the cards in this set are from like Return to Ravnica, OG Theros block, Magic Origins, basically the era of Magic just before Arena was born. And while that's their number one goal, they wanted to fill the Pioneer backlog, they also said that they really wanted to make this a good draft format. And I think they did a really good job of that. I played the early access streamer event yesterday, got in about 3 or 4 drafts, and I think we've got a really good one on our hands. I'll get into some details on that as we go, but for now, let's just get into the meat of what you need to know for drafting the set. So big picture stuff here, this being a Masters set, a few things you can kind of expect. When I think Masters set, the first thing that comes to mind is just higher power level. Generally, the commons you see in this set are going to be a little bit higher power level than you might see in your average draft set. Same thing with the uncommons, same thing with the rares. And even though this is a set that is comprised of a lot of older cards where you might think, okay, a little bit less powerful, what they've done to make it feel like a higher power level master set is they've done a lot of rarity shifts. So you're going to find a lot of cards that were originally rares shifted down to uncommon, a lot of cards that were originally uncommon shifted down to rare. In some cases, in a handful of cases, we've got rares that have been shifted down to common, like Dreadbore here. So Dreadbore, red-black for a sorcery at common, was a rare back in Return to Ravnica. Just says destroy target creature or planeswalker. Not wild to see this text box on a common these days, but back in the day, if your card ever said planeswalker anywhere on it, you immediately got the bump up to being a rare. Just to give you a good idea of how many cards were affected, I think roughly there's about 20 rares that were shifted down to uncommon, 20 uncommons that were shifted down to common, and there's actually a handful of cards that were commons in their original set, and they got upshifted to uncommon. Either the cards were a bit too powerful for being at common. For example, Triplicate Spirits here is a 6-mana white sorcery that has Convoke, and it says make 3 1/1 white spirit tokens with flying. Very powerful card, the best common in its set by a long shot. Or the other reason that they've upshifted some cards from common to uncommon is they wanted to reprint them for Constructed, but didn't really want these cards crowding up the common slots in draft packs. So an example for that is Crypt Incursion. It's a 2 and a black instant, and it says exile all creature cards from target player's graveyard. You gain 3 life for each card exiled this way. Sideboard card, not exactly a card you would play in your draft deck very often, and I think it's good that they upshifted these kind of cards. The second thing to consider with this being a Masters set, while there is a group of core mechanics in this set, the mechanics that this set's backbone is really built off of, there's also a lot of one-of cards with mechanics that you only see once or twice in the set. So we've got, for example, Spell Mastery, and Afterlife 1, and Evolve, and Awaken. I'm not going to read out exactly what all these do right now. Of course, when we get to the cards, talking about them a little more in depth, I'll make sure we talk them out. But do make sure, I would really recommend, just read over the mechanics, go over the set. If you plan to draft this set, really just read the cards once over. Even if you've played with these mechanics before, some of the intricacies you might have forgotten about. And of course, if you haven't played with these cards before, really helps just to read the cards once before you jump into your first draft. And then last thing I'll say about this being a master set, and something you need to consider, is master sets are always very much about drafting decks, not drafting cards. And I think what that really comes down to is just make sure every card in your deck is there for a reason, right? Most cards in this set are generically pretty good limited Magic cards. There's not too many junkers here. So it's not a game of figuring out what are the good cards and what are the bad cards. It's a game of figuring out where do all the cards go. So just something to keep in mind in your early drafts as you're just kind of reading through the cards. Just make sure you're going like, what deck would want this card? Which of the supported archetypes and supported themes does this card shine in? For example, I've got Philology Archaeologist from Brothers War, pretty recent here. 1 and a blue for an 0/3. That when it enters, you mill 3 cards. You can put a non-land, non-creature card from among those into your hand, and if you don't, you put a +1/+1 counter on Philology Archaeologist. Back in Brothers War, Philology Archaeologist was pretty good, just generically a pretty good blue card. In most of your blue decks, you were happy running multiple copies. It really helped that one of the set's main mechanics, Unearth, really wanted you to self-mill. And I think in Pioneer Masters, you know, a lot of decks, like if you're just like a blue controlling deck, this card's going to be okay. It's not going to be amazing. It's going to be like a filler cheap card that maybe draws you a spell once in a while, but it really is going to shine in graveyard decks. And there's quite a few cards in this set that do ask you to actively fill your graveyard. So that's the kind of thinking I think you want to be doing. You know, you don't just think like, okay, generally how good is this card? Because again, most of these cards are pretty good. Most of the time you're going to be like, yeah, it's a fine Magic card. You really want to be thinking, what home is it going to excel in? All right, going a bit deeper here, let's get into the mechanics. And I'm going to cover that group of core mechanics that, like I said, build the backbone of what's going on in the set. The mechanics that you're going to see on 10, 15, 20 of the cards in the set. First one we're going to start out here that is very well supported is Heroic. So our example card here is Hero of Iroas. This is 1 and a white for a 2/2 at common. It says aura spells you cast cost 1 less. And the Heroic ability says whenever you cast a spell that targets Hero of Iroas, put a +1/+1 counter on Hero of Iroas. So just like Valiant in Bloomburrow, Heroic wants you to target your creatures either with combat tricks or auras. Unlike Valiant from Bloomburrow, it triggers more than once per turn. There's no limit on how many times you can trigger it, but it only triggers off of spells. Unlike Valiant, you can't trigger Heroic with a equipment or another creature targeting it. It's only spells, and that means you're going to be looking for combat tricks. There's pretty good combat tricks in this set, pretty powerful ones, pretty pushed ones. Auras, and there are some pretty pushed auras as well, but mainly the thing you're looking for with Heroic is bestow creatures, which is another pretty big mechanic in this set. So Celestial Archon is our first example here. This is 3 white for a 4/4 flyer. At uncommon, it's an enchantment creature. All the bestow creatures are enchantment creatures, and you can just cast it straight up as a 5 mana 4/4 flying first strike flyer. Or you can cast it for its bestow cost, which is 5 white, and it says the enchanted creature gets +4/+4 and has flying and first strike. So generally what you're going to get with your bestow cards is whatever the stats and abilities of the creature, that's what the bestow aura is going to grant. And you might be looking at that bestow cost being like, ooh, 7 mana, that's pretty steep. Well, it's so steep because when the creature dies or gets bounced or whatever you're enchanting, when that goes away, you actually just get the Celestial Archon as a creature on the battlefield. So they go and kill your Hero of Iroas that you've enchanted with your Archon, well, you're going to get the 4/4 flyer now. Some small rule intricacies with bestow. Number 1, if you go to bestow a creature and your opponent goes, okay, I'm going to kill that creature in response, it's not like a normal aura where the bestow creature is going to go to the graveyard. The way bestow is designed, it's actually pretty insulated against the person casting the card getting blown out. So if they do bounce your creature from under you bestowing something, the bestow creature is just going to land on the battlefield as a creature. Another thing is when your bestow creature is on the stack, whatever you've cast it as is what it acts as on the stack. So if your opponent goes to bestow Celestial Archon and you have an Essence Scatter in hand, 2 mana counter target creature spell, can't do that because on the stack, the bestow creature is just an aura. Next up, the modal double face spell lands from Zendikar Rising are back. So these are the double face cards that are spells on one side, tapped lands on the back side. These aren't like the Modern Horizons 3 ones where you can pay 3 life to have them enter untapped. They always come in tapped. And these are just generally pretty good spells, right? They just help you flood a little less often. Notably, they are at common and uncommon in this set, and they're also not 1 per pack like they were before. I had multiple packs yesterday where I had like 2 or 3 of them. And anytime these kind of cards come up, the question of, well, how do they affect your mana base is one that is often asked. And what I would say is I like to replace my first 2 basic lands with my first 2 of these. Once you start getting more, like you've got 4 or 5 of these in your deck, you can't really start replacing basic lands because then you just end up with too many tapped lands. But 2 tap lands in your deck, not a big deal. Small price to pay for getting flooded a little less often. And then finally, not exactly a mechanic, more of an archetype, but has a unifying theme. The Gates deck is back. The Gates deck from Ravnica Allegiance, and all the bangers are here. We've got Gate Colossus and Gates Ablaze and Gatebreaker Ram. We've got the Angel, so all the good cards from that deck. And of course, that begs the question, how often are you going to see Gates? And Gates appear 1 per pack in this set. You're going to see 1 tapped dual land with the Gate type. Actually, sorry, not exactly. There are the 10 tapped dual lands, of course, with the Gate type, but there's also a chance that your land slot is Gateway Plaza, which is the land that comes in tapped. You have to pay 1 when it enters unless you sacrifice it. It's a gate that adds a mana of any color. So basically 11 lands in the set, 11 gates, 1 per pack. This is a pretty well supported deck. This is what I drafted in 2 out of my 4 drafts yesterday. I'm going to do a little bit bit more in-depth talking about this deck when we get to the archetypes, but did just want to note that, yeah, this is a real deck in the format, something to look out for. All right, let's get talking about the archetypes in this set. So I'm just going to go through, give my thoughts on each of the archetypes, kind of just tell you what they're doing, the key cards to look out for, and notably, for each of the 10 two-color pairs in the set, there's actually 3 gold cards. There's 2 signpost uncommons and a gold signpost commons for all of the archetypes. So if you're in the right lane, it's really going to reward you in this set because you get multiple great gold uncommons or gold commons, and a lot of the gold cards in this set are very, very powerful. So we're going to start out with the first one, blue-white here. Blue-white is very classic. It's just a blue-white flyer deck, blue-white flying tempo. Our common gold card, Liev Sky Knight, kind of a nice one. 1 blue-white for a 3/1 flyer, and when it enters, you detain target non-land permanent an opponent controls, which means that that permanent cannot attack, block, or activate its abilities till your next turn. So essentially takes them off of a cycle of attacking or blocking. And then the gold uncommon here that supports flyers, very similar to Empyrean Eagle actually from Foundations. Thunderclap Wyverns. This is 2 white-blue for a 2/3 flash flyer. Other creatures you control with flying get +1/+1. It's actually almost the exact same card as the eagle, but it's an additional mana and it has flash. And then it gets a really nice spell too, Azorius Charm, blue-white for an instant. You can choose one, either creatures you control gain lifelink till end of turn, or you draw a card, or put target attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library. Notably, that is not the option of putting it on the bottom. That is, they have to put it on top. So if you are, in the mid or late part of the game, your opponent attacks like a 2/2. Really kind of nice sometimes to like just blank their next draw step to like, okay, you have to draw that 2/2 next turn. A common for this deck that I really want to bring your attention to, Gust of Wind. This is 3 and a blue for a sorcery at common. It costs 2 less to cast if you control a creature with flying, and the effect is return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, draw a card. This card was originally from Ikoria, and Ikoria's flyers kind of just sucked, which means that this card wasn't great in the format. I don't think many people think of this card when they think of Ikoria, but when you put this card in a set with actual good flyers like this one has, it's really, really powerful. Generally, these kind of effects, like the 3 mana bounce a thing, draw a card, are very good, and you're getting it for 2 mana in the right deck. So yeah, really want to stock up on these if you're doing the blue-white thing. And just before we get to our next archetype, I do want to call out the Patreon, patreon.com/limitedlevelups. If you've been watching the show for a while, or maybe if it's even your first go and you're like, wow, this is great content, go check that out. It really does help the show keep on going, and there's a bunch of awesome rewards over there that we want to give back to you. All those rewards based on getting you better at Limited Magic in some way, either deck tech help or video draft log review help, coaching tier at the highest tier, bunch of stuff over there. Go check that out, patreon.com/limitedlevelups. Next up, we've got blue-black control that also kind of plays in the graveyard a little bit. So the common here, Possessed Scob, is 3 blue-black for a 3/2 zombie at common. When it enters, return target instant, sorcery, or creature from your graveyard to your hand, and then if the Scob would die, you exile it instead. And that line of text is there, so you can't just keep looping them Gravedigger style. This card's pretty good, right? Just the ability to get back pretty much any spell you want from your graveyard. One of the signpost uncommons here is Tomebound Lich. So this is 1 black-blue for a 1/3 Death Touch lifelink. When it enters or deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, then discard a card. Just generically powerful card. And another generically powerful card, even more so, Dinrova Horror. This is 4 blue-black for a 4/4. When it enters, return target permanent to its owner's hand. That player discards a card. Notably, if your opponent has no cards in hand and you cast this and you target something, you basically just get to vindicate it, just kill it straight up. And it says target permanent, so you can bounce lands with this if that's something you want to do. I mentioned that there is a bit of a graveyard component in this set and in this color pair, and really the graveyard component is caring about the Delve cards. 2 notable: Treasure Cruise, which is the 8 mana blue sorcery, draw 3 cards with Delve, which means if you haven't encountered Delve, exile any number of cards from your graveyard as you cast this, and those help pay for 1 mana for 1 card. And the other Delve card here, Gurmag Angler. This is 6 and a black for a 5/5 Delve creature. Seems a lot less impressive than Treasure Cruise, and it is a little bit worse of a card, I think, but also just very strong. If you haven't seen Gurmag Angler in action, like a 2 mana Gurmag Angler, this card might look a little bit underwhelming. So yeah, you're generally going to be filling your grave by just casting good spells, casting card draw, casting removal spells. Your Tomebound Lich, when that hits, you get to draw a card, discard a card. I think that the Philology Archaeologist, the blue 2-mana card that mills cards. Like, that card's going to be pretty good here. There's a bunch of cards throughout the set that just incidentally mill some cards here and there. So yeah, just play this blue-black deck kind of just as a control deck, but also look for opportunities where you happen to, get a latest treasure cruise and be like, okay, well, maybe I want to add a little more self-mill to my deck to fuel these. Up next is red-black, and red-black is one of the lesser synergistic decks. Like, there's not a ton of, this is what you're doing in red-black. I think they kind of even labeled it like red-black mid-range. So the nice thing about red-black is its gold cards are pretty strong. Dreadbore, like we called that before, this is the red-black sorcery at common, destroy target creature or planeswalker. And red-black might get the actual best signpost in common in Blood Tithe Harvester. This is red-black for a 3/2 vampire. When it enters, you make a blood token, and you can tap and sack the Harvester to have target creature get -X, where X is the number of blood tokens, so twice the number of blood tokens you control. Activate that only as a sorcery. Really great 2-drop, and gets a kind of nice 6-drop that plays well with the 2-drop that we just talked about, Swift Warkites. This is 4 black-red for a 4/4 flyer. When it enters, you may put a creature card mana value 3 or less from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield. That creature gains haste. Return that card to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So just being able to use your Harvester, trade it off, kill a thing, get that back, get it back to your hand. You get a blood token on entry, and then pick up the Harvester, get another blood token when you cast it again. So kind of nice little synergy there. And like I said, all these cards are pretty good, just not a ton of inherent synergies. I think there is going to be a little bit of tension between the red cards and the black cards. The black cards tend to be pretty grindy, pretty controller oriented. The red cards, very much not that. So I imagine that this is mostly going to be just like a good cards deck. Nothing too complicated going on. And speaking of nothing too complicated going on, we've got red-green, and red-green is Stompy. Just generic Stompy, big red-green creatures. The common here is Zendikar Incarnate, 2 red-green for a star 4. It says Zendikar's Incarnate's power is equal to the number of lands you control. First signpost uncommon here, Destructive Revelry. Sort of a sideboard card, but I think you can probably main deck it in this format. So this is red-green for an instant. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Destructive Revelry deals 2 damage to that permanent's controller. So pretty good removal spell for artifacts and enchantments. I'm definitely going to have to play this set a little bit more to get a good sense of how willing I am to main deck this card, but there's enchantment creatures running around. There are some artifact creatures. There are some just, artifacts and enchantments people play. So I wouldn't necessarily be running to put this card in my deck, but I also don't think it would be that bad to play it. And the other gold card here, other gold uncommon, Gore-Clan Rampager. This is a nice one. 2 red-green for a 4/4 trample, but it's got Blood Rush, which means you can discard this card for a mana cost, red-green in this case, and target attacking creature gets +4/+4, gains trample until end turn. 2 mana +4/+4 trample, really, really nice trick. White-green is up next, and white-green is sort of interesting. It's got 2 sort of sub-themes. One is a token sub-theme, and one is a aura boggled style deck where you're trying to put a bunch of auras on a hexproof creature. So one thing that I haven't mentioned just yet is this set has a bonus sheet. And it's a very interesting bonus sheet because just like Shadows over Innistrad Remastered, if you played that, it's a rotating bonus sheet. The set is out for 6 weeks, and every 2 weeks, we're going to get a new bonus sheet. So there's 3 weeks in total. I'm going to go into depth a little more afterwards, but I'm bringing it up here talking about Selesnya because that token theme that I mentioned, it's more supported on some of the bonus sheets than others. Like right now, the first bonus sheet that we're going to be playing with is a Planeswalker bonus sheet. And it's a little more supported in the spells bonus sheet and the devotion bonus sheet because there are cards that have the populate mechanic, which says you can copy a token you control. So I would say for the first 2 weeks of the format, the token stuff isn't exactly what you're going to be doing. That's going to come a little bit later, but let's just get into the cards first here. So Selesnya Charm, really, really great card. Downshifted from uncommon to common. Green-white for an instant. Choose one of 3 modes. Either target creature gets +2/+2 and gains trample until end of turn, or exile target creature with power 5 or greater, or create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. Great modality. Basically no points in the game is this card going to be a blank or bad. It's always going to be pretty darn good. The signpost and commons here, Loxodon Smiter as the first one. This is 1 green-white for a 4/4. It can't be countered, and if a spell or ability would cause an opponent to discard this card, you instead put it onto the battlefield. Not too much discard in this set. Your opponent's not going to be like, turn 2 Burglar Rat and you discard this very often. I actually think it's quite hard to trigger this, that ability. But, it's a 3 mana 4/4 that can't be countered, which is minorly relevant. Actually, kind of funny. There are a lot of cards in this set. If you just do a Scryfall search for can't be countered, this spell can't be countered, it's on like 10 cards or something. So just a little bit of a quirk there. And then the other signpost in common is a nice one. Unflinching Courage. This is 1 green-white for an aura. The enchanted creature gets +2/+2, trample, and lifelink. So this is kind of alluding to that kind of Boggles hexproof theme that I was talking about. There is a lot of other auras in the set, like I mentioned, talking about the heroic stuff. In green specifically, we've got Audacity from Brothers of War back. That's the single green mana. Creature gets +2/+0 and trample, and when that card goes to the graveyard, when Audacity goes to the graveyard, you get to draw a card. And the things that you're putting these auras on, 2 of them. One of them at uncommon, Basara Tower Archer, is a green-green 2/1 hexproof reach. And at common, Glaive Cover Scout, single green mana for a 1/1 hexproof. White-black up next, and white-black's just doing kind of a tokeny sacrifice thing. Not one of the more supported themes, honestly, but it's got a really good common here. Imperious Oligarch. This is black-white for a 2/1 Vigilance Afterlife 1. Afterlife 1 meaning when this dies, you make a 1/1 flying creature. And yeah, this card's really, really annoying if you haven't played against it. Just imagine, you play a 2/2, your opponent plays this on turn 2. You don't really want to attack into it because they just block and get a 1/1, and it has Vigilance, so they just get to attack into you too. So yeah, nice card, just generically good on the battlefield, but also just if you are sacrificing things, a nice thing to sacrifice. And then uncommons. Cartel Aristocrat, another nice card for this kind of sacrificey token deck. Black-white for a 2/2, and it says sacrifice another creature. Cartel Aristocrat gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. Another very annoying card. I guess that's kind of the theme for white-black's cards. Very annoying because, this is very much a threat of activation machine. If you've got any disposable creatures, this thing can't be really targeted by a removal spell. Your opponent can't really attack into it with their smaller creatures because you just sack something you don't care about that much. This gains protection. You get to block. And by the way, protection for those who haven't played with a bunch of protection. I always remember it by Debt, D-E-B-T, so the creature can't be damaged, can't be enchanted, can't be blocked, and can't be targeted. Also, there's a Blood Artist variant in this set, Zulaport Cutthroat, 1 in a black. Whenever a creature you control dies, you drain your opponent for 1. So, if you have a bunch of creatures, have a Cartel Aristocrat on the battlefield, have Zulaport Cutthroat, you have to just sack your board, drain your opponent for however many creatures you have. And then the second signpost here, not as good, but solid card. Sin Collector, 1 black-white for a 2/1. When it enters, target opponent reveals their hand. You can choose an instant or sorcery card from it, exile that card. Another card that is kind of annoying, but like I said, not quite as good as the other 2. And then we got green-black. Green-black is doing kind of green-black things. It's playing in the graveyard a little bit. It's being, kind of a mid-rangey deck. The black self-mill stuff that I was talking about, Gurmag Angler being that Delve card, that has a home here too. Drugmangler is the common here. 1 black-green for a 3/3 haste creature, and it has Scavenge for 3 black-green. And Scavenge just means you can exile this card from your graveyard, pay that cost. You get to put counters equal to this creature's power on target creature. So exile this from your grave for 5 mana, you get to put 3+1/+1 counters on something. Always seemed like such a strange card to me, like a green-black hasty creature. I mean, it's fine. It's a 3/3 for 3 that dies into some value, but nothing too exciting. It's nice to self-mill it if you can do that. Catacomb Sifter, though. This one's really, really good. This is the uncommon. 1 black-green for a 2/3 Devoid, which I don't think has much relevance in this set. Devoid just means it's actually a colorless card. So 2 mana, 2/3. When it enters, you create a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion token, which has sacrifice this creature, add a colorless mana. And whenever another creature you control dies, scry 1. So you're paying 3 mana for a 2/3 and a 1/1 that you can sacrifice for a mana, and you got that scry effect. I can see actually an Obzon tokeny sacrifice deck kind of coming together with those black-white sacrifice cards we talked about, Catacomb Sifter. I think there might be something in that space to play with. And then Nyx Weaver, another pretty strong one here. 1 black-green for a 2/3 enchantment creature. It's got reach, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, you mill 2 cards. I have to do it, by the way. It's not something that's a may. But if you ever fly too close to the sun, you can pay 1 black-green, exile Nyx Weaver, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So it gets to buy something back. I'm not exactly sure how deep you're going to be incentivized to go on the self-mill, fill up your grave stuff. I imagine, once in a while, you're going to get the cards together. But from just looking at the commons, I don't think you're all that incentive to be turbo milling. If you do happen to find yourself there's a really nice card that mills a lot of cards for pretty cheap. Commune with the Gods. This is 1 and a green for a sorcery at common. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You can put a creature or enchantment from among them into your hand, put the rest in your graveyard. So, you can imagine just casting this on turn 2 and then casting a Gurmag Angler the next turn. So that's a nice little synergy. Like I said, I think this card is probably going to be for your super heavy turbo self-mill decks, and I'm not sure how often that's going to come together. And then we've got blue blue-green. So blue-green is pretty loose in what it's doing. I think mostly what's going to happen with blue-green is it's the base for the 5-color gate deck. So we've got Skyrider Elf here kind of pointing in that direction. Skyrider Elf is the common. It's X green-blue for a 0/0 flyer. But it has Converge, which cares about the types of mana you spent on it, the number of colors. And it says, Skyrider Elf enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each color of mana you spent to cast it. So you can just pay blue-green, cast as a 2/2 flyer. It scales from there if you have multiple colors in your deck. I've played with this card quite a bit already, and it's solid. Yeah, definitely, just a 2/2 that you can trade off if you want to, and a reasonable threat later. Kiora's Follower, as one of the signposts and commons, blue-green for a 2/2. You can tap it to untap another target permanent, so it's a ramp creature. You can give your big green dummies vigilance if you want to look at it like that. And Urban Evolution is a big card draw spell. 3 blue-green for a sorcery. Draw 3 cards, and you can play an additional land this turn. So like a Mega Explorer, if you want to think about it like that. And so with that being true, with I think blue-green kind of being intended to be the base of the Gates deck, a good time to talk about the Gates deck in general. So like I said, I drafted this deck yesterday twice. It was really strong. I just felt like, these cards were doing their thing very well. The Gates payoffs, famously, are very powerful. So Gate Colossus is an 8-mana 8/8 that costs 1 less to cast for each gate you control. It can't be blocked by creatures power 2 or less, and whenever a gate you control enters, you can put the Colossus from your graveyard on top of your library. Gates Ablaze, this is another really nice one. 2 and a red for a sorcery. Gates Ablaze deals X damage to each creature where X is the number of gates you control, so nice little field wipe. Gatebreaker Ram, another great one here. 2 and a green for a 2/2. It gets +1/+1 for each gate you control. And as long as you control 2 or more gates, Gatebreaker Ram has Vigilance and Trample. Plays very, very well with Gates Ablaze, because once this is like, a 6/6 or something, your Gates Ablaze, it's going to deal 4 damage, wipe the rest of the field. You have a 6/6 Vigilant Trampler. Archway Angel is a 6 mana, 5 and a white angel. It's a 3/4 flyer, and when it enters, you gain 2 life for each gate you control. So really stands to gain you a heck of a lot of life. And then the support cards. Really important one here. I think probably the most important, District Guide. This is 2 and a green for a 2/2 at common. When it enters, you can search your library for a basic land card or a gate card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. And one that's been downshifted from uncommon to common, Courier's Briefcase. This is 1 and a green for an artifact. It's a treasure, so you can sack it to add a mana of any color. It also creates a 1/1 green and white token citizen when it enters, and you can pay Wooburg, tap, sack the briefcase, draw 3 cards. I actually got into the gate deck yesterday because I picked one pack one a Sylvan Caryatid, which is the 0/3, 2 mana 0/3 mana dork that has hexproof, into Courier's Briefcase, and I was like, okay, let's just see, if we can get a multicolor deck together. So yeah, a lot of good support for this Gate deck at common and uncommon. I've been calling it the Gate deck, but you could sort of just think of it as like a multicolor deck, a 4 or 5 color deck. You don't have to have the Gate payoffs to have a good 5 color deck. I think just, Courier's Briefcase alone is a really nice payoff for having multiple colors in your deck. But of course, if you're already prioritizing dual lands like you're going to in a 5 color deck and you're getting the payoffs, then, why not? Next up, we've got blue-red, and blue-red, as it often is doing spells, but the kind of flavor of spells this time around is like a blue-red prowess deck where you're kind of just trying to deal huge chunks of damage. So the common here, Nidix Cyclops, kind of supports that. 1 blue-red for a 1/4 defender. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, the Cyclops gets +3/+0 until end of turn and can attack as though it didn't have defender. Uncommon here, Storm Chaser Mage, red-blue for a 1/3 flying haste prowess. And then the other uncommon here is a spell, Steam Augury, 2 red-blue for an instant. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library, separate them into 2 piles, an opponent chooses one of those piles, puts that pile into your hand, the rest into your graveyard. So sort of like a Fact or Fiction, but worse in multiple ways. Like, it costs an additional color of mana, and instead of you having the final say of the cards, your opponent has the final say of the cards. It's an okay card. It's actually nothing special. I remember when this card was first previewed, people were like, oh my god, they reprinted Fact or Fiction, but added a color, and then they realized, like, oh wait, no, this wording is incredibly different. So yeah, a role player, but I think there's actually probably just better ways to draw cards in this set. And then one awesome uncommon that is good for a spells deck, but good for any blue control deck. Gonna be one of the best uncommons in the format, Murmuring Mystic. This is 3 and a blue for a 1/5, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you make a 1/1 flying creature. And then the last deck here is the red-white heroic deck. So the common is an instant combat trick. It's a kind of interesting one. It can trigger 2 of your heroic creatures. So it's Martial Glory. 2 lines of text here. Target creature gets +3/+0 until end of turn, and target creature gets +0/+3 until end of turn. So you could just have this be a 2 mana +3/+3, of course. But if you've got 2 heroic creatures, it's 2 triggers. Notably, You can't get 2 heroic triggers on 1 creature with this. You have to have 2 separate creatures because this is just going to count as a spell targeting your creature. It doesn't see that you've targeted it with multiple modes. The uncommons here, some really, really good threats. 10th District Legionnaire, red-white for a 2/2 haste, and whenever you cast a spell that targets it, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then scry 1. And Anix and Cymede is the second one here. 1 red-white for a 3/2 first strike vigilant legendary creature. The heroic ability is whenever you cast a spell that targets it, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until on turn. So super scary. So for supporting this deck, I mentioned combat tricks, I mentioned bestow creatures, I mentioned there's some pretty good auras in this set. One of said auras that is really strong, Ordeal of Perfros. This is 1 in a red for an aura. Whenever the enchanted creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then if it has 3 +1/+1 counters on it, sacrifice the Ordeal, and it deals 3 damage to any target. So basically, you grow your creature really large and get to kill something, or go to face, and then kind of a sneaky one, interesting. Ardenvale Tactician. So this is the adventure creature from Eldraine. This is 1 white for a 2/3 flyer. The adventure spell is Dizzying Swoop, 1 in a white for an instant. Tap up to 2 target creatures. And of course, you can target one of your opponents and one of yours, or if you want to get 2 heroic triggers, you go, I attack you, and then I go, after I've attacked, I've already turned my creature sideways, you cast Dizzying Swoop, so kind of some nice little play with this card. Then just to cap off the archetypes, I think, well, I really put an emphasis earlier on in the episode in making sure that you're drafting a deck, you're not just drafting a pile of cards, making sure every card in your deck fills a very specific role, specific function. I also think there's going to be a decent amount of bleeding between the archetypes. So, like I already mentioned, kind of the Obzon tokeny sacrifice stuff that I think could exist. I can imagine like a Sultai graveyard deck where you're combining the blue-black cards and the black-green cards. So do look for overlap, especially because I think 3 colors or 2 colors in a splash is going to be pretty doable in this set with dual lands in every single pack. Mind you, the Gates deck does tend to be one that people like to draft, so it could be the case that the Gates go very, very highly, and you don't get them as often as you would like to, but, just something to feel out as the format goes on. And then talking about the bonus sheets just quickly here. So one thing that I actually had a little bit of trouble doing in preparation for this episode is just figuring out what is on each bonus sheet, because if you just search on Scryfall, Pioneer Masters, it'll give you all 390 cards that are in this set, which is all of the bonus sheets and the main set at the same time. If you look on the Wizards website at their gallery, kind of the same thing, just every single card is just jammed in there. And there might be a way to filter it on Scryfall that I'm just not privy to. But what I've actually been doing is just going to the mtg.fandom wiki. It lays out the cards on each bonus sheet kind of nicely. I'm going to link this in the description, by the way, for anybody who wants to take a look at this. But the bonus sheets, like I mentioned, there's 3 of them. Each of them is going to be around for 2 weeks. And they are Planeswalkers for the first one. Then we're doing spells, so just a bunch of spells, and then devotion. Actually, those might be swapped. I'm not sure. But I know the first one is Planeswalkers. And don't worry, it's not a Planeswalker in every pack. I think 15% of the cards on this list are Planeswalkers. The other ones are cards that either support Planeswalkers, like the Oath enchantment that say, if you have a Planeswalker, do this. And I think a really smart design thing they did here is a lot of the cards on this list that aren't Planeswalkers or care about Planeswalkers are like evasive creatures. So just something that can help you a little more in a metagame with a few more Planeswalkers than you might expect in your average limited format. There's going to be more ways to combat them. So that's kind of a nice little thing too. But yeah, I'm not going to go through every single card just right here, right now. As the weeks go on, I'm definitely going to cover the bonus sheets as they come out. They might be their own little video. They might be integrated into a future episode. Not exactly sure that's going to work. But just like any bonus sheet, these are 1 per pack. You're going to see 1 bonus card per pack. Finally, just some closing remarks on the set. I think it's going to be a pretty good one. I had a lot of fun in my early access drafts. Mind you, like I always say, it does not take a lot from a Magic set for me to have fun in my first drafts. But also, the early drafts of the format do tend to give me a pretty good picture of how many viable decks there are and how fun the drafts are and how fun the cards are. A lot of really fun cards. Maybe it's just nostalgia speaking because the kind of era these cards are mostly from is when I started playing. But like I said, I had a lot of fun. I think there's a wide variety of decks to draft. A lot of the decks are doing very different things. If you're bored of Foundations because it wasn't complex enough, this set is definitely going to scratch the itch. So I'll give it a try, even though it's, kind of a full new set to learn if you haven't seen these cards before. I think a lot of the cards are fairly intuitive. A lot of these cards are not massive walls of text. Once you learn the main mechanics, you're going to be like, okay, I kind of get what this kind of card is. So yeah, if you weren't planning to make this your main draft set, I would definitely give it a try and see how it is. Like I mentioned, if Foundations has not been scratching that itch of the kind of intricate Magic, limited Magic that we had in the last little while, I think this one will probably do it. And yeah, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much. Like I mentioned, going to do some more Pioneers Masters content, most likely, being out for 6 weeks means that we're gonna have a lot of time to do that. So come back later for some more. If you're still watching and you're not followed, please do subscribe to the channel. It really helps. Leave a comment, all that good stuff. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.